Welcome back to Marx Headroom. I believe this has got to be week 20 of this series, this channel. And if you're new, I've been fasting much of my life. Probably since I was a teenager, I've been experimenting with fasting. But the last 5 years, I've been fasting 5 days a week and eating 2 days a week. And so I'm getting ready to break a 5-day fast as soon as I finish this episode of Marx Headroom. And I like to kind of empty my head and body, so to speak, at the end of a fast on film and share what I've encountered during the week. And this has been a very powerful week. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to come out. I've been very upset. I did really almost vomit, got sick on Wednesday, and you can imagine what that was about. Um, so I I generated a lot of content this week. I put out about seven videos on oil and gas, and I created some content around my new book, The Gap, which speaks to using your own sense of yourself in your life without external guidance to navigate what you're encountering, and not necessarily react to the encounters that you have from a sense of running or opining or resisting or trying to conform or escape, but rather staying engaged and noticing what you're feeling and what's happening inside of you, because the system that you're in, it doesn't really connect with all that inner life that you have. And most of us have not been raised, have not, we've forgotten how to connect to that. And so it's a real challenge for those of us that are older to do that. I think if a young person is listening to this and happens to have the right environment around them, this could be a cakewalk, because 90% or 99% of the challenge that most of us have is getting rid of the patterns that have been handed down to us for the hypnosis that most people have been in for generations, and not owning their full power. In fact, as a Christian myself, in a special sense, not necessarily an organized religion sense, but just as someone that heard the words of the master at an early age, I believe that he really did speak to our own self and inner knowing and connecting with that and having access to the divine through that process. And that process was kind of hijacked, in my view, and used to lead multitudes of masses of people, most people, away toward externalizing and giving away their power. And you see that very clearly today, how we've given away our power to celebrities and institutions. If someone went to a special school, we look at them, or they have a degree in something, or of a profession that is respected in the community, we treat them with some kind of reverence. We kind of change our behavior around them. And so when we go to work, we fall into some of these patterns that, some of them may be very excellent for creating civilizations that are not acting out in violence and sexuality overtly and acting on a primal basis. But a lot of those primal conditions are I won't say they're unnecessary because we don't really have any choice. They're kind of like how we're operating with that killer monkey um, on our back, so to speak. But as we've learned to watch ourselves and manage that, I think we're doing a better job potentially of not acting out in violence or rage or sexuality or raping or and pillaging our neighbors and family members and community members and people that we encounter in our lives. There is the capacity for a real sense of safety, and that's what drives you crazy today, is seeing how unsafe the our nation has become with the civil unrest and the tensions in our communities. We've lost some of the peace that I felt like we would probably be able to provide the next generation. I don't think that's necessarily the case. The last work that I did this week in my oil and gas work talked about really the demise of the American economy because of the tremendous debt and the excess that Americans have found themselves living in. And I see that every week whenever I fast, and people are talking about how impossible it seems that to do what I do. And I won't say, it doesn't seem impossible to me. It seems quite possible, and it seems quite necessary. Now, why? Now, let me just tell you real quick, and this is a very, uh, deep, dark place that my willpower comes from, but I was sexually molested at 5. And, psychologists and people with good sense will tell you that people that lost their control early on in life, especially in a formative age, will try to find a way to have control over their life. So there's things that I can control, and those things, one of them is food. And I've gone through periods of time where it's been food or sex or um, the discipline that I apply in exercise and athletics and in managing my entire life, every aspect of my life. That willpower, comes from that wound that I had early on. And so I don't really wish my pattern of living or willpower upon other people, because for me, it's something that I understand about myself and how I operate. And I know that not everyone else has access to that level of willpower. And, for me, it's also a connection to a calling that I feel like was ordained or, part of my incarnation here on earth. So that's how I'm operating, but it does give me access to some things that all the ancient masters and monks and philosophers have seen into. But now what's emerging is, since I have carried myself through the systems that exist and are revered, education institutions, um, big corporate institutions, as well as private institutions, and access to private equity, how those guys think, and banking and transactions and the super rich, as well as people. I mean, the first thing I did whenever I came to Austin 10 years ago to live full time was interviewed 10 semi-homeless and people that were labeled with psychological disorders to capture their story, and they connected with me. And part of my abilities to connect with people stem from what happened to me early on. I mean, I've worked my whole life to recover from that and to maintain my dignity and my rage and to try to find, to deliver something meaningful from my life, as difficult as it has been, day by day, hour by hour, with feelings that come out of nowhere, continuously, because I'm so sensitive, and yet I try to stay aware and connected to the possibilities of being of service to my fellow man. So that's what Marx Headroom is especially all about. Transcendent is also about that. My other YouTube channel and Substack, as well as the work that I do on FutureWise, just trying to mine the best from the life that I lived inside of oil and gas, getting exposure to many of the aspects of American and the world life, or life around the world in various cultures, to that a lot of people aspire and dream of having the chance to do those things, even in athletics, having the chance to see what it's like to be in the locker room with a high caliber team and coach, and everything that comes along with celebrity, so to speak. And then, my adventures into the film world, of trying to discover how films get made, and what it's like to be an actor. And that acting, was super helpful to help me sort out what happened to me in my life, and get in touch, or back in touch, with feelings that had been severed. And so, here I am speaking from that, from the standpoint of trying to deliver through the gap in that book. I found myself speaking to several people about that this week, because I think it does offer a pathway into something that you do have control over, on from moment to moment, and in your daily life, as to how you stay aware with what's going on inside of you, and observing what's happening outside of you. And I noticed that, as my TikTok this week started really blowing up. I started getting a lot of questions from some people that were seeing some of my videos for the first time, and subscribing or following. And that felt nice to get that engagement, because people were asking questions that I hear sporadically all the time, but they were just coming like one after one after one. And at least that's the way they appeared to me. But I think they all seem to kind of come in these big flurries. And those questions are things that I've been well prepared to respond to, from the standpoint of someone that's not engaged. And I found most of the interaction, the things that were sent to me, I won't say most, I haven't gone back and done a real analysis of this, but they were kind of asking, which side are you on? Are you for this, or are you for this? They're in the polarity, and there's an identity attached to each of those. The way the comments are structured, often I can sense whether someone is kind of where they're at. And there's a few people that are more like me, that are I won't even say that I'm in the middle. There's a lack of engagement that is required. And if you read the book, The Gap, I hope that I've described it well enough for people to walk away and to have a better sense of what that's like. But participating in this polarity is very futile. And if you in the bigger picture, if you listen to my last video about how petrodollars, which I'm putting out just a little bit later today, but I've made several videos to try to illustrate to people how futile some of these issues are in the U.S. that we seem to be fighting for. We are 4% of the world population, and the rest of the world is growing with leaps and bounds. And many of them are in developing countries, maybe Africa and India, for example, where like 2 billion people have been added in the last 25 years, and 2 billion people. And those people feel entitled to the kind of lifestyle that you have here in the United States. And they're going to use oil. They're going to use whatever they have to, because we've shown them, they've seen through the media, through our technology, what it's like to live the American life and live with more than you need in these excesses. And these people have lived for a long time with just maybe even below some of their actual needs. The quality of life in those places outside of the United States. Oh, so this is an explosive time for the U.S. and part of the concern that I and others, have is that um, it, now more than ever, it's important to have very dignified relations with others. And I'm talking about people, just around us here in the beginning, or, in your sphere of influence. And that's where everything really does begin. But we need to be reaching out around the world to find ways to have a more dignified relationship with those who are really growing into a part of or a new life that lies ahead. Maybe not for the generation that's present today, but the next generation of some of these societies that are developing out of poverty and coming into places that we've been here in the United States. And the petrodollar and some of this dominance that the Trump administration is trying to desperately capture in the world today has to do with the loss of the American lifestyle. That is. I mean, you can look around. I mean, the opportunity for the next generation is not near what it seemed like for my generation. And you can see that the instability in society is stronger than ever. And a lot of this comes back to our debt, the several trillion dollars of debt that is being traded around the world by these other countries. And they're starting to figure out ways to take the U.S. out of the bigger equation that we've been embedded in for at least 50 years through some of the deals that have been struck behind the scenes around a lot of the banking and institutions that have kind of been forced to play to the American um, dollar, so to speak, that have benefited the common American, and we're seeing those benefits start to slide away. So if you tuned in for Marx Headroom to learn how to fast or become more conscious, you're not getting as much of that today as you are maybe a reference to or a suggestion to go check out my FutureWise energy. Go to roach.com. You can see my Substack. You can buy the book about the gap. You can get into the consciousness series, the 25 book. Start with The Stranger in that series if you feel like a novel is more relatable. And but people need to understand some of the motivations behind the things that are happening and driving, I think, the Trump administration to to be very aggressive internationally and being very unpredictable to, um, I think it really is irritating some of the real powers that be that, it's far beyond me to say how this is gonna come out. And I think there's some things that I just don't understand that are almost like, they're bigger than any single human being to really have an insight on. But like the people that are asking me questions that are kind of looking for, well, do you feel this way or that way? To me, how I feel is really irrelevant in terms of that game. That's a really big game. But we need to know and understand what is going on because we're going to have to deal with the a diminished level of excess that we can live with here in the United States. Those debts are going to be held in and must be paid some in some fashion. And so the concept of make America great again sounds very appealing in that backdrop. That we do have a debt to pay off, um, but we also are seeing how big of a divide we have, and we're also doubting whether the people that are trying to control the narrative, are basically just trying to manipulate the masses. When someone can see cause and effect on a video and just clearly say have an explanation or a narrative about what happened and why that does not correlate with any of the evidence that's shown on that film. That's cause for concern, and I'm saying that very diplomatically, but that's where we're at, and that's why learning to see things for how they really are is so much more important than it's ever been. Because there was a time where the hypnosis that people fell into, and working for a company for 30 years or 50 years and getting the gold watch at the end of that, did provide a standard of living and safety and a sense of dignity, whether it was all because of what you did and you felt, a lot of pride over it, or whether it was handed to you by God and nature through the environment that was created by some of the big deals that get done. That's another factor or another story, so to speak. But what we do have control over in the moment and always have had is our relationship with reality, seeing what's going on and developing your own internal ability to feel and develop your perceptions and avoid the external power give. I mean, I love it whenever I get a comment from someone that I'm not talking about politics whatsoever, but they throw in a political thing that shows their loyalty, like, yeah. And I'm like, oh no, that's like, I know you felt really powerful whenever you made that comment, but you gave it away. And you're like doing the polar opposite of what you believe that you're doing. And we have to wake up to that. So hopefully I'll get some comments out of this Marx Headroom, and this will it starts with one. It starts with you, and that's really the extent of it. And you have to focus on what you do have any control over, and that is how you um, interact with your environment and how you respect yourself. And the more attention that we pay to that, it's going to be so much more easy to make the adjustments to the times ahead as we see real change coming. So I'm going to go break my fast now, and I'm wishing you a peaceful and all the best.